Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters on Armstrong Television. This is the show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers, and Lee gives me the opportunity to chat with them. This is also an opportunity for you all to learn what goes on behind the written page that you love to read. It's great to have you with us, and it's also great to have our guest, Ellen Birkett Morris. She's an award-winning writer, editor, and teacher in Louisville, Kentucky. Her fiction has appeared in Shenandoah Magazine, the Antioch Review, the Notre Dame Review, the South Carolina Review, among other journals. Her commentaries have been heard on public radio stations across the United States, and she's a winner of the Bevel Summers Prize for Short Fiction and the recipient of a 2013 Al Smith Fellowship from the Kentucky Arts Council. She holds an MFA from Queen's University in Charlotte. And Lost Girls, which is what we're going to talk about today, is her debut collection of short stories. Ellen, thank you so much for coming to see us today.
So pleased to be here with you.
This is a terrific collection of stories. All of them, every single one touched me in some way or another. Some were funny, poignant, tragic, every range of emotion you can think of, and they all got to me. What inspired you to put this collection together?
I was mainly inspired by the Me Too movement when we heard about women stepping forward and telling some stories about their experiences. And I thought how very much we need to hear the voices of women, not only in real life, but in our fiction. And it turned out that I had a collection, enough to build a collection of stories that dealt chiefly with the concerns of women and girls. So I've got protagonists that are young girls, late elementary, middle school girls, and go all the way up to a lady in her 80s. And, and I have to say, just so fun to explore that range of experience of women's experiences through fiction. So that was mainly the thing that made me think, I think it's time.
Yeah, I was curious about the title. To me, rather than these girls and women being lost, they seem to have their act together a whole lot better than most of the men and the boys in the story. Why'd you choose that title?
I thought it was evocative, that it sort of brought up this idea of women losing their way and then finding their way eventually. And it initially came from my title story, which is the story of a girl who disappears. And so in that story, I was really concerned with honoring girls like her who have vanished, and finding ways to remember them and honor them. And so that's where Lost Girls came from. But I like to say that though they may seem lost at first, they find their way, and often they find their way with help from each other.
Yeah. So tell us about that first story and what actually happened and how you fictionalized that into a short story.
Yeah, when I was 18, a young girl disappeared from a mall down the street from where I lived. And she was in areas where I had walked and spent time before. So, it set off a lot of alarm bells in my head that something like that could happen. It became a huge case. It actually spurred on the development of the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is a big deal. And so it was through that I kept that idea in my head for years, this idea of a girl who vanishes, and how would you honor her, and how would you remember her, and how it might actually be a complicated sort of emotional journey, because the girl in the story, not only does she miss the other girl and want to honor her, she also has some strange feelings because the other girl got attention and she lived in a family where she got very little attention. So I thought, well, let's make this fully complicated, fully human, and see if we can't find a way to honor the experiences of girls like the girl who went missing in my neighborhood. And you'll see towards the end of the story, one of the ways she does that is that she leaves age-appropriate objects for the girl at the site where she disappeared.
Mm-hmm. You say that this happened when you were 18 and that you thought about writing then. How long have you been interested in writing?
Oh gosh, my father was a writer. His name was John Birkett, and he did a couple of mystery novels set in and around the racetrack with a Louisville private eye. So he created a private eye named Michael Reinhardt. And so I had that model. I had him at the kitchen table, at the typewriter, working away. And so it was always, story was a big part of my life. He used to read us Flannery O'Connor short stories at bedtime. So
Right.
yeah, quite a lot for a young kid, and yet a great education in how story works. And so so I have a story that I wrote when I was a kid it's on lined paper, illustrated by my sister. I had just always been interested in writing, but I took jobs in journalism, and I was in my mid-30s before I said, well, if you want to write creatively, you need to do it now. So, and then I just got right to it.
That's good for you. So did you stop journalism at that time?
You know, yeah, I still do author interviews. I do author interviews for a site called AuthorLink, but now the other work that I do is it's more media relations, and I work for the Kentucky Foundation for Women, helping to publicize the work of feminist artists in Kentucky who get grants from the organization. And then I also, along with that, get to do some wonderful tribute pieces about women in our community. So, uh,
Tell us a little bit about being on public radio, doing commentaries there. Do you still do that?
you know, it's been a while since I've done one of those. My local public radio station opened it up to a group of local writers to do commentaries. And then after I did those commentaries, I recorded them and put them up on the Public Radio Exchange. And what I found is that every couple years, our public radio station, somewhere across the US might pick up one of these essays and play them. And they're short, they're 2 or 3 minutes long at the most, and they cover a range of topics, some funny, some a little more poignant, but it's really it was great fun to do, and it's great that they have a life out there, that they're out there on the PRX website. So.
And you're also listed as an editor. What do you edit?
Well, now presently, I am not doing any heavy editing work, but for 10 years, I was the editor of the Patton Saber, which was the newsletter of the George Patton Museum Foundation at Fort Knox. So that was a big job. That is a lot of folks in the armor community there who had a lot of interest in General Patton. And so I spent 10 years telling stories about World War II and about the armor community. I had an opportunity to visit the Patton family home and I saw a picture of the general with FDR reviewing the troops. And that was kind of a special moment. Got to see his sabers and his helmets and all of that. And so that was a job that I did for a good 10 years or more. And it was lovely. I'd get letters from fellows who had been in World War II. Sometimes I could barely make out the writing because they were quite old when they wrote, and they tell me about their experiences serving under General Patton. So it's the kind of job that if you had told me when I was younger I would do it, I would have been surprised because I'm not that immersed in military history, but there was plenty of good storytelling to be had there. So.
That, well, all of that certainly led you to write some great stories here. You've got almost all of these people are at some critical juncture in their lives. You've got a teenage girl in the one called Rumor of Fire, Cindy in Bottle Tree Blues, Sarah in Helter Skelter. Each one of those is really in a kind of a critical place in their lives. The story that one of the ones, besides the one about the older woman, the one I liked a lot was Inheritance, because I've always been fascinated with the character of a sin eater.
Yeah.
Tell the audience a little bit about what the old folklore of the sin eater is and how you put that in this story.
Yeah, I actually learned about sin eaters from my sister-in-law, Jonna Walton, who grew up in Western Virginia, and she was talking about folk traditions, and it was so startling when she mentioned that there were people in a community who would get paid to come and symbolically eat the sins of the dead. by consuming a corpse cake that's been placed on the body. And I thought the idea was just so full of metaphoric potential, and that it would be interesting to explore the fact that the economic inequality, and the fact that it would likely be a very poor person who would choose to take the job of sin eater, and to take that sin on themselves. They'd have to have real motivation to do that. And so that was the beginnings of that story. And that's another story idea that I hung on to for 10 years or more, in a file, and tried to write and tried to write. And finally, one day it came up, it came to me that this was going to be a girl who was in a coal mining community, who was being exploited, and that she was going to be in the center of this rich family's life, not only because she was chosen as the sin eater, but because she was pregnant with a child of the son. And then from there on, I just kind of had to, I had to let her do what she was going to do. I was very concerned about how I was going to end the story, and I kept having to ask myself, this what would this woman do? What does she? How much courage does she have? How much spunk does she have? What sort of pressure is she under living in this community? And what I came up with was a story with quite dramatic and somewhat sad ending. And yet it was the truest ending I could come up with. So,
what do various people or have various incidents inspired some of these others, like, for instance, Bottle Tree Blues?
oh gosh, Bottle Tree Blues was inspired by, the great Kate DiCamilla. Wrote the book Because of Winn-Dixie. And in that book, she has a character who has a bottle tree, and the woman with the bottle tree had been an alcoholic. And so she hangs the bottles on the trees to remind her of her past and to keep her from drinking. And so I got fascinated with that bottle tree. And then I decided, well, I wanted to use it in a setting that involved a young woman who has a romance with a guy that she doesn't know very well, and sort of figure out how it might play out in that setting. And so that was the origins of that particular story. Yeah.
I was having a discussion this morning with some other people about what constitutes literary fiction, and we came to the conclusion that they have universal themes, and I think your short stories do that. Almost every one of them has, like, for instance, Harvest has a universal truth of how we feel young inside, even though we're wearing, silver hair and wrinkles. Do you automatically think of those things as you're writing the story, or do they kind of pop up and say, oh yeah, this is kind of universal? Do you try to write around some issue or some human condition that we all suffer?
I think oftentimes it starts with character, and that particular story started with an older woman on the bus, and she sees a reflection and she thinks, "Who is that old lady?" And it's her. And so she's immediately sort of repelled by the difference between how she thinks she looks and how she looks, and starts to get rid of her the mirrors in her house. But as I started to explore that idea of aging through her experience, it really occurred to me that ultimately she was going to come to peace with herself, because she was going to recognize that the self that is her is there regardless of age. And that as you said, we all feel 16. We all feel like we did when we were 12, and we're not. you know so it was just a lot of fun trying to get there. And one of the ways I helped her grapple with the questions of aging was that a friend that she loved very much was doing the same thing, was really having a crisis about having aged. And so it was through helping him that she came to the realization that it really didn't matter what she looked like on the outside. She was always and forever herself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes me understand why people always say that their body's betraying them, because inside they don't feel like, they feel like their knees all should work and everything should just be the same as it always was.
Yeah.
So I understand that. Another one that I thought was good was emoticon. we're stuck like you and I are right now on our screens. Um, have you sat in the cafes or restaurants or coffee shops and seen couples who are just like that? They're all immersed in their screen and ignoring each other.
Yeah, absolutely, I have. And the degree to which it becomes a shorthand for real communication. It's easier because they don't really have to look at anybody, or really think about anything except for what they want to say next. And so again, I thought, well, let's put a young woman in this situation and see what she's going to do to say, hey, this doesn't work for me, no more.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh gosh, my favorite is Religion. Religion is the story of a young woman who thinks she's going to a decoupage class, but ends up in a breastfeeders league meeting and decides to stay.
Yes, I love that. Now, where did that come from?
Oh my gosh. Well, I first started the story thinking about how social groups like Breastfeeders or La Leche League can sort of feel like cults sometimes, like they want you to act a certain way and here's the rules and we're all together on this. So I started with that premise that, like, let's see what happens if she wanders into a cult and decides to stay. But really, the story quickly transformed itself into a story about loneliness and longing. This woman is so lonely that even though she doesn't have a child, she's willing to come back to the meetings because the people are so lovely and warm. And she goes to great lengths to try to fit in and to explore that maternal side of herself, despite the fact that she doesn't have a child. And I have to say, it's a funny story, it's a sad story, and I love that mixed together. And it was another case of a character taking me someplace that I never imagined they would.
So you start with a character and put them in a situation. That says to me that you are not necessarily a plotter of your stories.
Not, yeah, I'm not at all. And in fact, now I'm working on some novels and I'm not heavily plotting those either. I'm sort of letting those characters take me where they will.
Wow. I wish I had the ability to have the faith to do that. That's that's quite a talent to do that. Um,
Wild ride.
I guess since you heard Eudora Welty as a child, she would probably rank right up there as one of your favorite short story authors.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's that Southern voice, but it's a funny voice. It's very, and the words are beautiful. You just doesn't get much better than that. And for writers who are looking for inspiration, she has a book of photographs that she took um, under the Roosevelt administration through the WPA. And her photographs are wonderful story prompts or poem prompts. I've written a couple of poems that were based on her photographs of the South. So if you're looking for inspiration, you might look for that book.
Huh. Um, Back to the collection, you said some of these stories had been in your mind, or as we call them, orphan stories that were sitting in the drawer someplace. Um, did you collect them and put them into this book, or did you work towards having a book by writing a number of the stories fresh?
A number of the stories I wrote fresh, but I wrote them under the idea that it was going to be a book about a male Southern photographer from Boston who traveled through the South. And nobody was much, he was a very quiet character, and publishers were not very interested in him. But when I looked at the stories, I saw that the women in the stories were really the ones with the interesting lives. And so some of these were already built from that. Some of the other ones were ones that I had in a drawer, who that happily joined the collection. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, let's see. What's your writing life now? Like now, are you teaching or are you just doing the writing?
So I have the couple of paid jobs that I mentioned earlier. I teach, but I'm teaching on a class by class basis. So I'm going to teach a food writing class through the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning in Lexington, and that'll be in April. I'm going to be teaching a story endings class, how to write effective story endings through Hidden Timber books, and that'll also be in April. But I'm not in an actual classroom full time, which is just fine with me right now. I'm in the process of working on two novels, getting revisions done on those. One of them is really pretty much ready to go. The other one, I'm still in the process of revising. Again, like I did with the short story collection, just trying the novel form. It took me a long time to work up to it. So I started as a poet, then started writing short stories, and then I thought, well, I'm going to give this a shot. So we'll see how that goes.
Good, good. You want to give us a hint or not?
Well, I've got two novels in the works. One is a story called Beware the Tall Grass, which is an alternate tale between the mother of a son who has past life memories and the soldier whose memories the son has.
Hmm.
So the mother goes into it thinking, "Oh, a blank slate. I'm gonna get to help this kid become the best he can be." And instead he's got a whole world of memories in his head, and she's got to help him cope with that. And then in the meantime, we get to see that soldier's life unfold in a parallel story. And then I've got a book about a female astronomer in Hawaii who has a discovery, who leaves behind a sick mother that she's very close to, who has a romance, an altogether lighter book than the first. So, yeah.
Did you write these at the same time?
No, actually, I wrote
How did you do that?
yeah, I wrote the war story first, and then this last one. I started this last one when my mother, I lost my mother 5 years ago. Started it when she got diagnosed with lung cancer, and so the second book about the astronomer is really a love letter to my mom. So,
Nice. Was
yeah.
she an astronomer?
No, she was a nurse.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
but very interested in science and an altogether lovely person. So.
right. Um, oh, tell us about your poetry. You have a poetry chapbook out as well.
I do, and that's called Surrender, and that's through Finishing Line Press in Georgetown. And then I've got another chapbook that's going to come out this July that's going to be called Abide, and that is through Seven Kitchens Press in Cincinnati. So, um, and I love working in poetry. I think it's the economy of language. It's the fact that you come up with very crystal clear images that convey entire worlds behind them. And there's something about doing it that I find immensely gratifying. It's a bit like working a puzzle, discovering just the right image and just the right words. And
Mhm.
like my short stories, my poems tend to be short. I'm not going to write a 20-page poem, but yeah.
The other thing that we were talking about this morning when I was talking with some other writers was the use of metaphors and similes and whether or not they flow organically as you write, or whether you go back and think this scene will be enhanced if there's some simile. Which side of that coin do you come down
Yeah.
on?
So this is certainly not original to me, but I've listened to different writers who, and particularly the writer Ron Carlson talks about this. I populate my stories with as much authentic, quirky detail as I can. And then I find that the objects themselves take on metaphoric significance. So I'll put a lot of stuff in the room with the person. And eventually, as I write into the story, I'll see that one of these objects may take on a weight that you wouldn't have expected it to take on, just simply as a function of being in the story and sort of as things unfold. There are ways to work that in. So I kind of work that way. I work from detail to metaphor versus having a metaphor in mind. Um, but I think it works quite well. I've got in one story, not in this collection, I've got a story called Watermelon, and this guy is getting ready to go to have a picnic with a girl that he likes a lot, and he's got this beautiful round watermelon that he's bringing, and he's thinking about the potential for the day, and at the beginning of the story, it's there, it's whole, it's all a mystery, but at the end of the story, she's sort of forsworn him, and there he is picking up the watermelon rinds off of the sandy beach and throwing them in the trash. So the watermelon worked perfectly as a metaphor, and yet it was just sort of something I planted in there when I started without a lot of intention.
That's interesting. That's kind of a gift that occurs, I think, while you're writing. That's interesting.
Yeah.
There's one other character I wanted you to explore a little bit, partly because the name of the story evokes something that we don't like to think about, but it's called Sarah. It's Sarah in the book called the story called Helter Skelter, and we of course don't like to think about Charlie Manson and all of that, but that's where that name comes from. How did that story evolve?
Oh gosh, yeah, that story I began as a writing exercise, writing stream of consciousness, and really exploring. I wanted to explore the ways in which, for a young girl, particularly one who has an older sister, the world can seem mysterious and very dangerous, and can in fact be mysterious and very dangerous. Uh, and so there's a young girl in the story, and she kind of has hints as to things that are happening with her sister, but she's not crystal clear on exactly everything her sister is involved in. And she has a tragic backstory. You know, their mother committed suicide by walking out into traffic, and their father works nights at the Ford plant, and the older sister is running around with a guy in the middle of the night. And so the girl in the story goes to try to find her sister, and some tragic things ensue. But it's populated with neighborhood characters, old men who hang out in bars, and the crazy guy who came back from Vietnam and has a tattoo on his hand, and and so it was really, for me, an exploration of sort of the menace of what life could be like for girls in those pre-high school years, when you know a little but you don't know a lot, you know.
The town that you've set most of these stories in is Slocum. Is that's obviously a fictional town, but did you have a town in mind that kind of is Slocum?
You know, I didn't. It's a fictional Eastern Kentucky town. And I have to say, I think I was borrowing Paige from Elizabeth Strout. And I wanted to do a Kentucky version of what she did for folks up in Maine. And I thought, well, let's see if we can pull that off. And so that was where Slocum came from. Yeah, but there's not a particular real town, except, you know, I wanted to explore this idea that when we live in a small town, we do feel that we know our neighbors. We feel that we understand them. And oftentimes they have entire lives that we know nothing about.
Right.
So
Are you from a small town, or are you from Louisville?
I'm actually from Louisville. My mother was from English, Indiana, which is a really tiny town just across the river. And so a lot of what I learned about small towns, I learned from her.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Tell us about where we can get Lost Girls.
Okay, so
Actually, both your books.
yeah. So Lost Girls you can get through Amazon. You can get it through IndieBound bookshop. You pretty much should be able to order it from your local independent bookstore. Surrender, and actually I have Surrender right here. Surrender you can find through Finishing Line Press. And then come July, Abide will be there, available through Seven Kitchens Press.
That's great. That's great. Will you be out promoting those books once the mask wearing is kind of relaxed?
I certainly hope so. I am ready to get back out into the world. So,
right. Yeah. Anytime that we had a book released during the pandemic, we all kind of sat back and watched it just sit there in our basements.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough. It's just been a tough time for sure.
Well, we look forward to seeing your next two books and to talking with you again when they come out.
Thanks so much. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Connect with Chapters through email. Write to lp4@zoominternet.net. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. All Chapters episodes are available on YouTube. Visit the Armstrong Neighborhood channel on YouTube and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.